Hi everyone, this is Aprajita, a story scholar with the 1947 Partition Archive. This is day 15 of our series 75 Days of Partition. I am co hosting this event with Gunita, Sonam Kalra, and Noor Anand Chawla. Today I have here a very special guest, Haroon Khalid. He is the author of four books, including Imagining Lahore and Walking with Nanak. He has also been a travel writer and freelancer journalist since 2008, and he has traveled extensively around Pakistan, documenting its historical and cultural heritage. I welcome you back, Haroon. Your association with the archive is very highly valued and appreciated. So, coming back to your topic, how partition transformed Lahore. My first question to you is, how do you describe Lahore before partition, and how has it changed after partition?
Well, firstly, thank you so much for having me. This is my second talk with 1947 Archive, and I'm very excited to be back. So, talking about Lahore, how Lahore has been transformed by partition. But actually, what I argue is that actually Lahore today is a completely different city from what it was. So, in many ways, like even though Lahore has this long history of 1,000 years old, at least. But what Lahore is today, in many ways, is a very, very different city from what it was at partition. So at partition, Lahore was a multicultural city. Lahore was a multi-religious city, and the architecture almost was very different. And you see, and so what you have today is remnants of those, and they survive as relics. They survive as museums, but not as living or breathing parts of the city. So in many ways, Lahore, the city, is very different. So one example that I would give you is that before partition, there was a very popular saying that Lahore as a city has 31 festivals in 30 days. So what that means is that, of course, there were many festivals, different religions, different cultural. So some festivals, of course, were strictly religious speaking, but even then there was an overlap. So, for example, we know that for Diwali, for Holi, there were many Muslims who were celebrating these festivals. For Eid and for other Sufi shrines and their festivals, we know that many Hindus and Sikhs were participating in those festivals. So that culture was actually pretty much lost. So what happened after partition is now that you have many of the Sufi shrines, and those festivals have survived. But in many ways, those festivals have now become more exclusive to the Muslim and Islamic ethos, whereas pre-partition they meant something else. They included something else. So Shah Hussein's Mela, for example, was this big Mela that was attended by all Lahoris, irrespective of religion, but now it's seen as a very Muslim Islamic festival. There were a few cultural festivals that survived. So Basant, for example, survived in Lahore for many, many years after partition. And if you speak to any contemporary Lahori, they will tell you the importance of Basant. Like it was the biggest festival. I know so many of my cousins, for example, who were living abroad used to not come back. So if they could come back to Pakistan only once, they would choose to come back on Basant and not on Eid. And that goes on to show the importance of that festival. But of course, recently that festival itself has died. It's been banned. And similarly, there were also so many other cultural festivals like Lohri, for example, which is a beautiful winter festival that is still celebrated in Punjab in India, but has pretty much died in Lahore. So all of that has sort of changed. The whole fabric has changed. So not just the population itself. I mean, we know that almost 40 to 50% of the population was Hindu and Sikh, which left after partition. Now you have a very small minority of the population that lives in Lahore. Lahore is predominantly is a Muslim community. Within that, it's also like it has lost its ethnicity as well. So it is a very Punjabi city. People still migrate to Lahore, but from different parts of Punjab. So it is. I mean, there is a very popular sort of snobbish thing that many people from Karachi, for example, that say about Lahore is that Lahore today has become this one big village, which in many ways it is in terms of its attitudes, in terms of its values, in terms of its politics. So it has lost a lot and has become a very different city from what it was before partition.
So, how I imagine Lahore to be before partition is like this place which has so many, good institutions. It is a hub of literature and a lot of other cultural things. So, how has that changed after partition?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So in many ways, I would argue that Lahore still is the educational hub of Pakistan. But what has happened though is that the entire education model has also changed, right? So since 1980s, we've had privatization of education. So now you have hundreds, if not thousands, of schools and colleges and universities in Lahore, and some of them are pretty amazing. But they've also sort of sharpened the class divide. So what you had pre-partition is, even though there was this social, you needed a certain social capital to get into universities like the GCs and the Punjab universities, but they were still government run. They were still affordable. Now with privatization of education, so you have, like, I know my family, for example, from different parts of the country have come to Lahore. I know many people come to Lahore for education. So it is the educational hub. But in many ways, that educational hub has also meant that there is a sharp divide in classes, because privatization of education, as many people have argued, even sharpens the class divide much more. So that legacy has continued, but also in a slightly different way. In terms of culture as well, absolutely. So Lahore, even after partition, for a big period of time, was the cultural hub, remained the cultural hub. So, for example, Faiz Ahmed Faiz lived in Lahore, Manto lived in Lahore. There were many other sort of very, very popular writers. Intizar Hussain was Lahore based. Park House for many years after partition remained this hub of culture, of literature. The Pakistani film industry, which really sort of came to its own after partition, was based in Lahore. And so for many years, Lahore sort of carried that legacy. I feel like till the Zia years, the 20 years, the 10 years that he was there, I think really sort of took a stab at the cultural life of Pakistan overall, but Lahore particularly. And so Lahore has lost a lot of that culture. I feel like that vibrant lit, literature, that the vibrant artistic scene. I mean, it still exists in pockets. So, for example, LLF would be this huge space, but then once again, it also is mostly in English, and it's very different from what, like, it's not the same from what it used to be. And in many ways, I feel like a lot of culture has moved to other cities. So I know Karachi, for example, in the past few years, has really emerged as this hub of film and media, which once Lahore was. So yes, so there are these remnants, there are these relics that exist, but in many ways you can see the disintegration of that. So sorry, just one last point about it. So I know, for example, at Lashmi Chowk in Lahore after partition was this place where all film producers and editors used to meet, and you had these film posters, and it was a beautiful space. Cinemas, and all those cinemas have now survived, but the film industry is really sort of, especially the Punjabi film industry, has really crashed, and it's a pretty sad scene.
So, Haroon, tell us a little more about your journey of tracing old and new Lahore. How was your journey?
Yeah. So I think the title uh, sort of defines what my journey is. So in many ways, when you are traveling around Lahore and when you're engaging with this history and story, because a lot of times, because of modernization, because of capitalism, a lot of those structures have been put down. A lot of those cultures, as I mentioned, have sort of disintegrated. Those traditions have disintegrated. So what now? If you want to engage with the history of the city, you have to imagine. And that's where the title of the book also comes from. Like, it's imagining Lahore, because Lahore today, whereas does reflect some remnants, some relics, but a lot of that culture is not there for you to see, for you to engage with. A lot of those historical. So we have popular historical buildings, but those are just a few handful. A lot of old temples, gurdwaras, schools, buildings have been lost. A lot of them were lost to partition, for example. They were taken over for residential me purposes. So in order to really engage with the history of Lahore, and in order to really understand how Lahore was historically, a lot of that work has to be done imaginatively. So what I did, for example, was I used to go to a place, and whereas there is nothing physical there, but the story that I know existed around that locality, then you have to go. And for me, I was imagining that history there. I was imagining those characters. I was imagining history unfolded. So I think for me that was a very interesting and beautiful experience, and so that's how that's my understanding of cities. Also, just taking this.
Since
Yeah.
I also work with memory. So I think, can we correlate this your reimagining of an old Lahore with the memories people have of the of a
Yeah. Sorry, I missed the last part of the question. The reimagining of.
yeah, can we correlate your reimagining of Lahore as it was to people's memory of how that place was?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, that's actually what I was about to say. That the idea of any city is imagined. Like we engage, we imagine cities in the way that we want to. So for example, a lot of partition survivors that I've spoken with, especially people who have immigrated out of Lahore, who went to India, for example, think of Lahore and imagine Lahore in a particular way, and then a lot of times when they come back or when they visit Lahore or their future generations do, it's a very different city. So for a lot of them, it is almost like a cultural shock because they imagine the city to be something else, and it has become something else. I know people, for example, who've moved from Delhi to Lahore, and then when they go back to Delhi, their engagement with the city is very different. So in many ways, cities, we create these images, these symbols of cities in our mind and memory, and of course, with the way the partition happened, which means that the borders became hardened. So it was no longer possible for people to visit the cities. So those imaginations became even more stronger. So perhaps Lahore would have not acquired that. That not Lahore would have not become that symbol that it eventually became in the imagination of many people. Many Lahoris had border remained open, but it didn't, and that's why I feel like those memories and those symbols and those imaginations continue to even become bigger and bigger.
Um, Haroon, your second book, Walking with Nanak. I'm quite tempted to ask that what got you interested in the Sikh heritage?
Yeah. So, Walking with Nanak essentially is a book about Guru Nanak. And so, how I understand it is essentially, I don't think of it as Sikh heritage or Muslim heritage. I mean, of course, it is Sikh heritage, so not taking it away, but essentially thinking about heritage and religion from a non-communal perspective. So there's a lot of work done on religion, which says that these modern categories of what it means to be Muslim, what it means to be Sikh and Hindu, are colonial constructs. And if you look at early colonial history, and especially within history, like we know that how the colonial state, how colonial historians created these very sort of categorized religions. So, for example, Guru Nanak was revered by many Muslims. He is still revered by many Hindus, and in fact, he is still revered by many Muslims in Pakistan as well. Similarly, you have many popular Sufi saints, Muslim saints, Baba Farid, Bulleh Shah, Waris Shah, who are revered by Sikhs and Hindus, Punjabi Sikhs. So these saints actually go on to show that there was a lot of cross religious, I mean, even though or cross sort of communal interaction. So that's actually how I see Guru Nanak. So I don't see him as somebody who does not belong to my heritage. In fact, for me, he is part of my heritage because I'm Punjabi. That's the identity that I associate with, and you can't and Punjabi identity, Punjabi language as it is, cannot exist without Guru Nanak. His contribution, I mean, even if we don't talk about his religious contribution for a minute, his contribution to language is pivotal to how Punjabi language evolved to what it became. So for me, it was more of an exploration of my own heritage, of my own history. I wanted to understand Punjab better. I wanted to understand, and through that, I wanted to understand myself better. And I could not have done that without engaging with Guru Nanak, of course. So that's where a lot of my interest came from.
So, through your research, what have you found that how has Sikh heritage since changed after partition?
So there's multiple ways in which Sikh heritage has changed. So, for example, based on my work with Sikh heritage or Gurdwaras that are associated with Guru Nanak, I think there's 3 or 4 ways, big models of how what has happened. So some of the Gurdwaras have recently been renovated, or were upheld, or were sort of still populated by some Sikh communities. So, for example, Gurdwara at Guru Nanak, Janasthan, was some Sikh community remained there, and then there was some early migration in the 60s and 70s, Sikhs coming in from northwestern, which is today Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. So some Gurdwaras remained and were continue that tradition of Guru Nanak, even though at a lesser scale, but that's so those gurdwaras now remained. And over time, the Pakistani government has renovated many of those gurdwaras. So what you see today, for example, the Kartarpurs, the Nanak Janam Sthan, Hassan Abdal, Lahore, there's a gurdwara in Lahore, Guru Arjan's gurdwara in Lahore. So many of those gurdwaras have been looked after and have been well maintained and now are open to Sikh communities. Having said that, those gurdwaras are still in a minority. So if they are, let's say, my mentor, for example, Iqbal Kesar, did some work on this, and he identified around 180, 190 historical Sikh gurdwaras. And by historical Sikh gurdwaras, what he means is that gurdwaras that are associated with one of the 10 Sikh gurus. So these are like the most important gurdwaras. And I think out of those 180, perhaps 20 or 30 have been renovated in the past few years. So they're still a minority. Then a majority of those gurdwaras are gurdwaras that are actually now in shambles or that have been taken over by others. So some are being used as residential quarters, some are being used as schools, some have become, some have sort of have been completely ruined. And those are the majority of the gurdwaras that are in horrible condition. They're just like old structures. Many people, so if you go to those places, people will tell you this used to be a gurdwara, but many people don't engage with this history. So it's just this old abandoned place that people know and talk about. So those are that's the majority of the gurdwaras. And then there's a few that I find very interesting, is that in some ways, some sacredness of that place has been kept alive. So some of those gurdwaras have become Sufi shrines. And we have to sort of understand that in a very interesting way, because there's different models and frameworks in which how you can understand it. So one nationalistic way of understanding it is that, and I saw that when I wrote a few articles about it, especially from a right-wing nationalistic point of view, that look how bad the Muslims are. They've taken over the gurdwaras and they've made it into Sufi shrines. Actually, that's not what's happening. What is happening is that if you engage with that tradition, you see that many Sufi shrines, many gurdwaras have become Sufi shrines because that was the locals' language of keeping the sacredness or the holiness of that place alive. And Guru Nanak somehow still figures into those stories. So a couple of Sufi shrines that I went to, people still talked about Guru Nanak in a sacred, in a very holy manner. They thought of him as somebody who was sent by, or as a man of God, and so on. And the Sufi shrine, and the reason why it became Sufi shrine, because people understood that space as sacred, and they wanted to pay homage to that sacred space. And the only way they understood how to pay homage was to express it through Sufi shrine. So in many ways, I find that story as a very beautiful story, because it shows that people are carrying forward a legacy, perhaps in a different language, in a language that is more contemporary, that is more based on the social political context of the current time. So you have a few gurdwaras that have now become Sufi shrines and carry forward that legacy in a very organic manner.
So I was going to ask you about this last point, which you have already answered, because during my interviews also, I have found a few stories which correlated that certain mosques, here in India, after the Muslim population left, they had either converted it to schools or they had converted them to places of worship. That's how the story goes on with the sanctity of the place being maintained. So why do you feel, with your kind of work, I feel you're writing about your religious aspects of your country from a different point of view? Why do you feel there's a need for that?
Given where both India and Pakistan are going in terms of religious nationalism, and even Bangladesh, there is much more of a need to talk about. So what today you will interpret them to be as alternative religious traditions, but actually at one point before colonization, many people have argued that these were these mainstream religious practices, and they actually present us with this alternative understanding of what religion is, what nationalities can be, and I think for me that's a very, very important part of. So it's my way of engaging with contemporary politics. So I'll give you a little example. For example, the project that I'm working on right now is on Varisha, and Varisha, as you know, is very, very important to Punjabi, not just culture, language, literature, everywhere. Punjab is Varisha and Varisha is Punjab. So if you engage with Heer Varis, you will see that how that book beautifully encapsulates this pre-colonial culture, where Varis Shah can quote Quran on one line and then in the next line he can quote Gita, and then he can quote Ramayana, and then he can just talk about Rashada Salu, and then he will talk about Prophet Yusuf, and just beautifully merging of these different traditions. He will call Ranja Krishna at one point, and then he will call him Yusuf at some other point, and you can see that how beautifully he sees no contradiction in that, and Varisha essentially represents that. And Varisha, in fact, is carrying forward that. So Varisha also does not exist in vacuum. He is carrying forward that legacy that is informed by Guru Nanak, that is informed by Guru Arjan, that is informed by Bulleh Shah and Baba Farid, and so on. So he's part of that whole tradition, which was the mainstream Punjabi tradition, Punjabi culture, and Punjabi religion. But unfortunately, what has happened is, and of course, partition has even worsened that to some extent, is that identities, especially religious identities, have become more fixed. And I think more than ever, there is a need to go back to these historical stories, to those histories, and sort of decolonize our understanding of religion. So for me, that's why I engage with it. For me, it's my engagement with contemporary politics.
So Amrita Pritam, as you must be knowing, wrote this iconic poem, Akha Varishanu. So she was also criticized for describing the pain of women by calling out to a Muslim prophet, to a Muslim, writer. Whatever. Yeah. So she was criticized for that without knowing that he belongs to just not to one religion, but he speaks for other religion as well, to that unity that existed before partition. So I think the kind of change you're trying to bring through your saying a lot of things that are more often not said or are being avoided, through your books and your articles, you are reinforcing a kind of hope and a courage to view things as they are. I thank you, Haroon, for joining us today. It was a very enlightening discussion session. Thank you again. For those who are watching, this is 75 Days of Partition. We started on 3rd June and we will go on till 17th of August. Please join us daily. We are doing an event every day except Sundays. So tune in for more. Thank you.